There is only one takeaway from the latest Pew Religious Landscape study in the U.S. that's good news for Christians. So you can bet your ass it's the one that is virtually everybody's headline for this story, including Pew's. So the headline is that the decline of Christianity in the U.S. and, to a lesser extent, the rise in religious non-affiliation may have leveled off. May have. And despite the survey being chock full of indicators that atheism and secularism are still on the rise, that's the big takeaway that every major news outlet has chosen to run with. If you just read the headlines, as oh so many of us do, your takeaway might be that the decades-long decline in American religiosity has finally reversed. Which means that you'll likely hear moderately informed religious people parroting that dubious claim in the near future. So before they do, let's take a deeper look at the numbers. So the Religious Landscape Study is a survey that Pew started doing back in 2007 and then again in 2014. COVID kind of delayed the intended follow-up in 2021, but on the day that we're recording, they finally released the data from their 2022-2023 survey. And so between 2007 and 2014, the number of Americans identifying as Christian dropped from 78.4% to 70.6%. And in this latest survey, the number dropped even more by like a lot. It's down to 62%, which is approximately the same percentage drop as there was between the first two surveys. So how the fuck are they claiming this represents a leveling off? Well, other surveys that Pew did in the interim showed the number of Christians continuing to decline precipitously, and the current number isn't significantly lower than it was in 2019. That's the good news that they're doing a victory lap around. Sure, their numbers are down another 8% over the past decade, but they're not down over the last 4 years. At the same time, the number of people identifying as religiously unaffiliated also seems to have steadied over that shorter period of time, though it's still up a ton since the 2014 survey. So if you stop right there, it looks like relatively good news for Christians. But you really have to stop exactly there because almost every other datum in this fucking thing is good news for us. Like, for example, the age cohorts. Like, for the oldest respondents, that is the people over age 74, 80% are Christian. With the youngest respondents, those aged 18 to 24, that number drops to 46%. That's not even a majority. Hell, it's barely higher than the 43% of 18 to 24-year-olds who identify as religiously unaffiliated. And I want to be clear here. Yes, people do tend to get more religious as they get older, but that only happens to religious people. There's plenty of evidence to show that Christians pray more and go to church more and believe in God more as they get older, but there's very little to suggest that non-religious people become religious as they get older. In fact, the trend in this case is decidedly the other way. So even if the decline of Christians and the rise of nuns has leveled off, there's no reason to suspect it could stay that way for long unless we invent some kind of immortality and stop having babies. And by the way, when it comes to stuff like church attendance and daily prayer, a far more meaningful measure of one's religiosity than self-identification with a particular faith group, there's been no leveling off at all, even in the short term. In fact, the decline in those measures may well be accelerating. So not only do fewer people identify as Christians, but even the ones who do are less Christian. That's not the only good news we non-believers got, by the way. Another very encouraging takeaway is that both atheism and general non-religiousness seem to be getting significantly less white and significantly less male-dominated. In fact, right now, only 63% of American nuns are white. The percentage of Americans in general who are white is 62% or 75%, depending on how you define it. Now, most of that growth comes from Asian and Hispanic non-believers, and the percentage of African Americans identifying as religiously unaffiliated is still far lower than like their corresponding percentage of the population. So there's clearly still work to be done at, making our spaces more inclusive and welcoming and reaching out to those communities that we tend not to reach out to. But the survey shows that the work we are doing seems to be paying off. It's just that we're not doing enough of it. Similarly, the gender gap is moving in the right direction, possibly even quicker. When they did this survey in 2007, the percentage of women identifying as nuns, that was 13% versus 20% of men. Now, in 2014, both percentages were higher, 19 and 27% respectively, but the gap was about the same. Well, in this survey, it was 31% of men and 27% of women, which means that the gap damn near halved. Now, of course, those are numbers for religiously unaffiliated people rather than atheists specifically, but our numbers seem to be following similar trends. We're still too male and we're still too white, but we're trending in the right direction. And we should keep in mind that all of these numbers that we're talking about so far, those are the numbers before you factor in whatever acceleration is going to come from living in a quasi-theocracy for the next 4 years.